what we're going to do at the moment is first, if it's okay, I'm going to start with a little bit of history of CSP for those of you who might not be very familiar with it, and we're going to go through a chronology of, when first what the market looks like at the moment, where is it based, and then a chronology of tower technology. So who's done what, so that you get a little bit of an idea of how it's gone and how we're getting to the point where we are at the moment. So let me just give me a second. I'm going to take this screen off. I'm going to share my other screen, which is my presentation. Just one second. Here we are. And just a note, please feel free to send me your questions. You can either send them to me by email. My email is at the end of this presentation, or you can send it, if you take your mouse down to the bottom, you'll see a little pop-up menu coming up, and there is a chat function in there. Feel free to send your questions there. What I'll do is I'll take those questions, and once that Phil is done with his presentation, we will share some of those, okay? So let's start. So my company is Atos Renewables. We have over 17 gigawatts worth of renewable energy experience. In case that you're thinking, oh, why are you talking to us? Quite a lot of that is on CSP. It's about 1.5 gig, which is significant if you consider how much CSP technology is actually deployed on the ground. We've worked in a series of CSP projects in various capacities. And we are advisors as well as engineers, but we also have a part of our company, Insights, that kind of deals with information like the kind of thing that we're doing. So let me tell you about CSP technology a little bit. So there is two types. I guess they could be divided in two types. On the one hand, it's when you focus the sunlight onto a linear receiver, and this would be the parabolic trough and Fresnel. Or you can focus sunlight into one point, and these are dish and tower. I mean, granted, each of them work differently, but this is a way that you could organize them. Dish, for example, depends how the dish is, but sometimes it's not necessarily even, it can be peak load energy. You can't necessarily even store that technology if you use a dish Stirling. Whilst in parabolic troughs, for example, you could use molten salt, so you can use steam. So I guess another way that you could characterize them is what is the thermal fluid that they use in order to take the heat from the sun and concentrate it. In the case of parabolic trough, Fresnel and tower, this is done with steam as well as with molten salt. Could be done with molten salt. So these are the two main differences. What the market looks like? Well, at the moment, it's a lot smaller, obviously, than the PV market and the wind market. You can see here by degree of development, if you like, right? Other just stands for those plants that are cancelled somehow. So in operation, so the amount of plants that are now working is nearing 5 gig, as you can see here, which is very, very much smaller compared to PV and wind. The next stage of development, if you like, would be construction, which are the plants that are going to start operating soon. And this is about 1,310 megawatts, so it's quite a lot. By the time that these plants are finished, we'll have the best part, more than 6,000. So 6 gig in operation. Then the next one would be in development. Those are the plants that are currently, paperwork is being pushed. There is some level of engineering being done. It depends, what markets we're talking about. If it's markets like South Africa, the developed plants could be very well developed and like nearly finished, complete projects ready to build. In other markets, a plant in development could be considered, like in China, just a plant that has a few environmental permits, for example. So this here depends, on the market where they come from to see like the actual level of development they do have. Finally, we've got planning. In planning, we've got nearly 6,000 megawatts, and this includes absolutely everything that has been somewhat, something is being moved, maybe some paperwork, some environmental, but there is a lot of this that may not happen. As we know, there is a lot like in planning, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they complete as a project. And finally, announced, we have another approximately 6,000 that people have said they would like to go ahead and develop, but they hasn't really quite started. A lot of this is, for example, in China, but we'll look at a breakdown now. This is the data from the CSP Today tracker, and as of May 2016. So this is something that I'd like you to take a look at. See, if you look at each of the different levels of development by the technology breakdown, something really interesting happens. And this is that an operation, which is the plants that are like most sure, you know, that they're going to go ahead, etc. You can see clearly that there is quite a lot of parabolic trough going. You know, the reality is that most of the operative CSP capacity we have is parabolic trough. This is a reality as of today. A little bit of this is tower, but really not that much. How, and a little bit of this is Fresnel. You know, this, you will notice that it hasn't really changed that much over time. So in operation, clearly parabolic trough is the winner. What happens in the next level, which it's here in construction? You can see in construction here, actually tower takes up a lot of that capacity, and it's like really nearly 50-50 with that of parabolic trough. This is where it gets interesting, right? There's a little bit of Fresnel here as well, but you know, clearly tower is starting to gain ground. The moment that you move to like the next level, which I would be commissioning, but we don't have anything commissioning, that would be development. Again, tower takes a bigger percentage, perhaps a little bit more than 50. But then as you go further and further into the development pipeline, you can see clearly that in planning there is a lot more tower than there is parabolic trough, and in announced even more so. So the trend is clear that is going in the tower direction, and we are going to look into the reasons why that may be the case. You know, when we talk about CSP in the future, it is very possible that we will be talking mostly about towers. We'll look into the reasons why that might happen, and certainly things like DIWA coming out and saying, "Oh, we want a tower," is certainly they're not the only ones that are doing that, but there is a clear trend in wanting or preferring that sort of technology. And I'd just like you to take a look at this particular graph. It's very interesting and very telling. And this has a breakdown by stage of development in the main countries that we that you have CSP development for. So like some country that that used to do very well, you know, and that had like kind of like spearheaded this was Spain, of course. Here you've got everything is operational. There's absolutely nothing else in planning. There were plants in development in Spain. The issue is, for them to be considered in development in Spain, they would have to be in the list, in the ministerial list that allow them to be developed. So anything that is not approved by the government is not even considered in development, even if there is a certain amount of paperwork and permissions that have been approved and that theoretically those plants are ready to build. Similarly, you have a market like China, for example, and you see that the pipeline is a lot longer and it's a lot more mixed. There's a little bit of everything. Attention, this blue and this blue is different. So this is actually standing for announced. This could look like a much healthier pipeline, but of course, what you have to bear in mind here is that for plants to be in development, all that has to happen is that some company has decided to go ahead and do a CSP plant and perhaps got an environmental permit. This doesn't mean that the plant is going to go ahead necessarily, but it's good to see that there is like a good mix of stages here. It just means that the pipeline is healthy. A pipeline that used to be really healthy and nice, though you know a little bit smaller compared to others, is that of South Africa. That it's because South Africa has a little bit of everything. Some operation, some on development, some in construction. You know, this is a healthy pipeline in the sense that it's moving forwards. A lot of this is in planning now. As you know, round 4.5 is about to hit close now. That perhaps Phil can tell us a little bit more on that, as you know, one of his plants is about to be for financial close, and then once that happens, hopefully we'll move into expedite. Although some of you might have been aware that yesterday there was a letter published from ESCOM saying that you know, they're unwilling to buy any further IPP energy for now. So there is certain amount of clarifications that needs to come from there. But in any case, this is like a good pipeline that we like to see more of. Morocco is doing very well. You know, there is nothing here that needs to be, I think, explained any further. Obviously, they have Nord 1 in operation, they have Nord 2 that is in construction, and Nord 3 that is about to come online, and Nord 3 is a tower as well. So this is one of the plants that I'm going to talk about now. We can see Israel, you know, India, Egypt. India is a little bit at a standstill at the moment until the government comes across and gives some new announcements. Chile is an interesting one, a lot being moved there. Even Solar Reserve has a lot of movement there, but we will see what happens. In the USA, obviously, is another country that has a lot of operational and quite a lot that has been developed, but at the moment we don't know what's going to happen. So this is what the global pipeline sort of looks like by breakdown. And let me go with you through a little bit of a history of the tower. So for those that may not be so aware of the history of CSP, I've been working on it for a number of years, and I absolutely love the industry. So I always like to tell the story that actually the industry started as a tower, which a lot of people don't know. The original idea for Luz Industries is, if you ask the guys that worked there from the beginning, was to create a solar tower. That's how they saw concentrated solar power actually working, with the high efficiency, the high temperatures. The problem is, in the early 80s, the technology wasn't quite there. What they were particularly worried about was controlling all of those heliostats and making sure that they could concentrate the sun on the one plant. The technology wasn't there as they like it to be. So they came up with what they call a substitute technology that kind of did the job for the time being with the technology that was possible at the time. And the guys that started Luz, they would tell you the story. And that was the SEGS plants that got developed in California from the beginning. As you know, there is 9 SEGS. They started from about 20 megawatts, and they ended up with 50 megawatts. And over the course of like 10 years, they built more than 300 megawatts, that some of which are still working perfectly and with record low PPAs for California. So it just shows that the plants are resilient and they can work. So over time, so everybody that is raising their hands, so just let me tell you, if you could send your questions either by email or by the chat, then we will make sure that we raise them. So over time, the tower technology really started in the 90s with Solar 1 and 2, which I think Phil will go into a little bit more depth. But commercially speaking, the first plant that we have in terms of CSP is actually PS10, which is in 2007. It's an 11 megawatt plant in Seville. Then we have PS20 in 2009, Gema Solar in 2011. These are the years in which they commenced operation, by the way. And then we have Ivanpah, which are very large plants. They started operation in 2014, just outside of Las Vegas. And then Crescent Dunes, which is one of the plants that we will actually talk about quite a lot, or Phil will talk about quite a lot. And then finally, last year or this year at the beginning, we've had Key Solar 1 that started operation and still really in commissioning, but started operation per se, started producing energy. But these plants, however, are very, very different from the ones that we're seeing in DIWA. Well, not necessarily all of them, but most of them are pretty different. Let's see how. So this is, let me just move this along. This is PS10. And PS10 is a plant that it was originally, as I said, in 2007, but it's actually saturated the steam. It has a backup fuel, and the storage here is just steam for 1 hour. So, you know, when there is a little bit of clouds coming in, they can actually deal with them, but really storage per se, not so much. This was originally a testing facility, although it's pretty large. It was followed pretty soon by PS20. You know, you can see the two differences here. This is the larger plant, and it was a 20 megawatt and a very, very similar plant in terms of its setup, the solar field, as you can see, and also the steam and the heat transfer fluid that it uses. This is the plant, I guess, that is in commercial operation that is most similar to the one that DIWA talks about, that it was the original one, I say, so the earliest one, if you like. Is not of the size, because it is a very small plant. It's a 20 megawatt plant. You know, Crescent Dunes, which is the one that Solar Reserve has in Las Vegas, it's very similar technology to this. But this is pretty much the first operational, if you like, tower that worked with molten salts, and it worked 24 hours for like a couple of weeks straight already in the first year of operation. And as you can see here, the molten salt capacity of the storage is 15 hours, so it's pretty long. It was a big jump in terms of, you know, what was done in Spain before and this. This is pretty much the kind of plant together with Crescent Dunes that DIWA is contemplating here for this particular licitation. So we will study this setup and this technology setup in more detail when Phil speaks. But this was a tower that was actually engineered by Sener and Torresol Energy. Then we have the Ivanpah complex in Las Vegas. Is really impressive. I mean, if you've ever there, you should go and see it. And it's very interesting because the heliostats that they have are very small compared to the heliostats of both Gema Solar and Crescent Dunes. But this also uses steam. So it's not a molten salt towers. It does not have storage capacity beyond like a couple of hours that it might have of steam. So it's different technology, really. PS10, PS20, and Ivanpah are different technology from Gema Solar and Crescent Dunes. And it is important that you understand that these are two different sort of animals, so to speak, with technology-wise. And this is Crescent Dunes, one of the plants that that Phil is going to go into a lot more detail, because this is the big scale of Gema Solar, if you like. It uses very similar technology, which I am sure that is very, very different when you look at the detail. Don't get me wrong, Phil can go into a lot more detail about this. But essentially, it's molten salt. It has a lot of storage. In this case, the data the CSP today has in the tracker is 10 hours. But now Phil is going to actually explain with a lot more depth. So obviously, this was a quantum jump in terms of size, if anything, and actually managing to deal with 110 megawatts. Big jump there for the technology. And this is finally Key Solar One, is the Nabengoa plant that is in South Africa. This plant has a lot of peculiarities, like it has like passive air conditioning, amongst other things, air conditioning, a cooling system rather, but it is saturated steam. So it does have a little bit of storage, 2-hour storage also for like clouds, passing clouds, intermittents and whatnot, but it is not like a plant with molten salt storage. So it's important that we understand this. Abengoa in those terms had PS10 and PS20. They scaled it up to 50 megawatts here in South Africa, but they never had started molten salt storage until they actually went to the next part, which are the plants that are now under construction. So we are not going to go into details on the plants that are in development or in planning now, because those are largely undisclosed items, that we could chat here, but we don't really have all the details that we need. So the plants that are in construction and the technology is pretty clear is Atacama 1, which is also follows that same Crescent Dunes and Gema Solar technology. Is the first time that Abengoa went for molten salts, and it's like large sizes, as you can see, 110 megawatts. That is what seems to be the case now, that companies have come to that sort of like size of 100, 110, or as we are going to see 150 megawatts as the optimum in terms of for towers. So you can see Ashalim here. There is a plant in Israel that is was originally done by Abengoa as well, but it's also a steam plant. We'll go into more detail now. And those two plants that I wasn't very familiar with that are going on in China, and that I am largely unknowledgeable about their stage of development. All I know is that these have been announced and they're under construction. But what are the integrations of, whether they use one technology or another is largely, I don't have that much knowledge about it. What I do know about Nord 3 is also the sort of technology that we're going to discuss here, molten salt, and it takes it to the next level almost in terms of technology, because it's 150 megawatts there. So here we have a little bit more detail. This commercial operation date is not at the moment, as you know, with the problem that Abengoa has had. This plant is now on hold, and is I know it's going ahead, and there is some traction and movement has been happening, but it's going to be a lot slower than this. So perhaps 2017 would be a better, more realistic date, but this is what it's announced at the moment. And the interesting thing about this plant is that the storage is actually 17.5 hours, and this is, I guess, the first time a project as a whole has been announced with also 100 megawatts size of PV field, which means that the two technologies are in one complex, and they take advantage of each other pros and cons to balance each other. So during the day, PV will be producing, during the night, I guess, or during the intermittent, CSP will give firmness, so that there is a lot of dispatchability on this plant, right? That's the point. It's looking at it from the whole structure of the plant. And this seems to be a huge trend going forwards. And to be fair, I have to say, the Solar Reserve were the first ones to talk about this sort of hybrid plant setups, if you like. And I think Phil will go into a lot of more detail about this, of taking advantage of, you know, each other's sort of like strengths, because this plant has been announced with a 95% capacity factor. This was very important for Chile because there is a mining industry that requires very firm power 24 hours a day. So it was very important that this existed, that there was this CSP was in the backup of the PV, and it wasn't just PV. So this particular project, once it goes ahead and it gets finished, it'll be, in my opinion, a show project for the ones that we're going to see later on. And we already very much seen this. The latest project that has been announced in Morocco, Midelt, very much follows also this sort of blueprint. So we're going to see more of that, not less. And obviously what happens is that eventually your capex gets reduced somewhat for the amount of capacity that you have. Your capacity factor is much higher, so overall your LCOE is much more competitive than, you know, just CSP on its own. So this is actually in plot B, bright source energy plant, actually, okay, and Aston, and this is for the time being just a saturated steam plant, but it's going on and is under construction at the moment. And these are the plants that I was saying in China that I'm largely unfamiliar with, but apparently here they're talking about molten salt, and it's 2 times 100 megawatt field. So obviously we're talking about a pretty large field here as well. And the sort of setup that, you know, also we're talking about in Diwa. And here as well, what has been announced, North 3, of course. This is one of the aqua plants with Sener, and clearly this is, SEPCO is the EPC here, is exactly this technology that we're talking about. We have just a little bit drawing here because clearly it's not the technology, I mean, it's not, we don't have finalized drawings, it's still under construction, but this plant will pretty much mark, I guess, the technology going forward. So this is, once it's finished, this will be the plant that everybody will be talking about. And finally, the Linga in China. This is a little bit of a different one because we're talking about a multi-tower approach. So this is in molten towers, but we have 5 instead of 1. And also a molten salt 6-hour storage. I'll be really interested to hear more about this project. It's commercial operation for 2018. So I guess we'll get more details as the plant develops. And finally, you know, this is pretty much what I wanted to go through so that you understood, you know, what is getting done at the moment and who is who. Your questions can be sent here. I'm going to be monitoring this. Or you can send the questions to the chat. I'm also going to be monitoring those. And without further ado, I'm going to take off my screen and allow Phil, who is the Director of Development of Solar Reserve, and he's responsible for driving the company's continued growth in North Africa and the Middle East. And has been in Solar Reserve from 2009 with more than 20 years experience in construction in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. And so Phil, if you want to go ahead and tell us about your presentation, then we'll take it from there.
Len, thank you very much for you know, the introduction. Thank you again for you know, inviting us to come along and have a, you know, sort of conversation and to talk about technologies and specifically tower technologies. And you know, obviously thank you to ATA Renewables as well for the invitation. So I'd like to really just sort of obviously introduce ourselves, you know, why we are here today, and tell you a little bit about, you know, Solar Reserve's heritage and our history, and how we, you know, how we've been developing solar power projects from, you know, sort of the inception when Solar Reserve first came to be. So, I mean, Solar Reserve is a solar IPP development company. We're not an EPC. We're not a constructor. We are purely an IPP We do, however, have our own innovative technology, which is the molten salt technology, that we're able to capture the sun's energy and store it within the molten salt. And this technology has, a very, very strong heritage, because it was developed by Pratt & Whitney Rocketdyne, the NASA scientists that, put the space shuttle into space, who developed the projects, who developed this technology, and had a sort of a zero tolerance to failure, as you can imagine, sort of putting men's lives in danger by putting them into space. But Rocketdyne are obviously, NASA scientists, fantastic on the scientific side of things, but they obviously weren't commercial in terms of taking this technology to the market. So hence Solar Reserve came along and acquired the technology, and then started developing CSP tower projects back in early 2007. And then from the sort of early days, we then sort of developed, a number of projects in the US and throughout the sort of solar belt. We now have sort of offices in the US, South America, South Africa, into Europe, into Turkey, and now here in the Middle East to focus on the MENA region, as well as sort of in Australia, and now looking into the China market as well. So from our sort of inception, we've developed more than sort of 3.1 gigawatts of power, which is the CSP molten salt tower technology. And our lead project, which I will go through in a bit more detail later, is our Crescent Dunes project in Nevada, which is the 110 megawatt tower project with 10 hours of storage. We also then have our next project, which is the Redstone project in South Africa, which we're closing the finance now. We hope to have that closed in August and go into construction on our second project. We also develop, obviously we're talking about CSP today, but, as an IPP solar developer, we also started in 2010 to develop photovoltaic projects, and now we've sort of acquired, sort of about 3.9 gigawatts of projects with, over 250 megawatts now in South Africa in operation. There's a number of projects that we have in sort of North America that we've been developing, and sort of a pipeline of about another 150 megawatts. So let me just talk a little bit more about the technology for those of you that haven't seen sort of our tower technology, or doesn't really know how it works. I'd like to give you sort of a rough overview, not to go into too much detail into this conversation, but obviously we're open to discuss further with people, or if there are any questions you have, please sort of drop them to Belend or into the webinar. So how does it work? Well, it seems quite simple, but we have a tall central tower that's actually about 200 meters tall, that sits in the middle of a field of heliostats, or mirrors. And each one of these mirrors focuses the sun up to the central receiver. Now, the receiver is basically like a boiler that sits on top of the tower. We then have the molten salt. Now, the molten salt is a potassium mix. The molten salt really comes, when you first see it, it's like a granular type material, almost like the table salt you would see. But when it's heated to around about sort of 260, 280 degrees C, it kind of melts and forms into like a liquid, almost like water in its appearance. Now that sits in what we call the cold tank. Although it's at sort of 280 degrees, we actually call it the cold tank. We also have another tank, which is called the hot tank. Now the cold tank, the salt is then pumped up to the top of the receiver. It's circulated within the receiver, and obviously it gets heated by the sunlight that's concentrated on the receiver, and that goes up to extremely high temperatures of around about sort of 565 degrees, 566 degrees C, or 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that salt then, via sort of gravity, comes down and sits in the hot tank where it can sit and stay. And that hot tank then, with the salt inside, flashes water to steam that then drives a standard ranking turbine generator. Now this generator would be the same generator that you would see on a standard power plant, such as a nuclear, coal or gas power plant. And that's quite key for this technology, is that generator is the same off-the-shelf item that you can see or buy for any power plant that you see in the market today. The beauty of the salt is that it sits in that tank and it's totally dispatchable. So you can use the salt as and when it's needed. You can generate power when there's no sunlight, for example. So these projects, and I'll go through again in a little bit more detail, are able to sort of generate power when there's no sunlight. They're able to generate power into the evening or through the evening. These plants are totally sort of dispatchable in terms of they're able to work with the grid operator. They can balance the load. They can be used as an ancillary service. They can shift the load to a dual peak, so they can have a peak, if there's an energy need at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, or they can produce power 24 hours a day, and then use the salt to help do that. Where they come into the value is that they're able to produce power without any intermittencies. So they're able to balance the grid, where other technologies without storage are obviously a little bit of a slave to the sunlight, or when there's no sunlight they can't produce power, or if there's cloud cover they can't produce power, or if there's no wind you can't produce power. But these projects are basically similar to any utility scale power project or power plant that's in the market today. So they can really match other forms of utility power. And here's again some of the benefits. So like I say, it operates like a conventional power plant, but the beauty is it's 100% green. There's no requirement to have any fossil fuel to back up the system. As I said, it's able to shift the power to when the power is needed. It may not, the power or the grid or the operator may need to have its power at the end of the day or during the night. And as we're seeing in markets such as South Africa and Morocco, the power need is not just during the day. It moves into the evening, which allows us as having the storage to shift that load to when it's actually needed. Again, having the storage, it enables the project to be stable. We're able to sort of give the power when the grid operator needs it, not necessarily when the sun shines. So it's able to work, I like to say, more as a slave to the grid, rather than the grid being a slave to the other forms of sort of power where they don't have storage. The beauty of this technology over some of the other technologies, I mean, all technologies have a place in the market. I'm not saying this is the be-all and end-all, but this technology is the most leading technology in the market today. But because it has what we call a single heat transfer fluid, there's only the salt in the one loop, where other technologies have to have two-phase changes, where they maybe have a direct steam type technology. Then that steam then heats the salt, and then the salt is used to flash the water to steam to generate the turbine. This is a single phase, so there's only one heat transfer fluid, which is the molten salt, and this salt stays in the system for the life of the project. It stays in for the whole term of the PPA. It doesn't need to be topped up. It doesn't need to be replaced. It stays in for the full life of the project. Now, the salt in the system is at a low pressure, where it doesn't have to be at sort of high pressures, which obviously again helps, with economics in terms of costing on capex. And because it's, again, we're able to reach those high temperatures, it's more energy efficient in terms of, costings to keep that energy at a constant sort of source. Also, another, I think a key point to this technology is that we're able to use dry cooling in the steam cycle. Now, dry cooling is of a great advantage to a lot of the regions that we're working in the MENA region, because obviously water is precious, and we don't want to be sort of using lots of water. So to use dry cooling obviously reduces the amount of water that's needed to work the system. And having the storage, we can make the storage as big or as large as the utility wants, but it's now such that we can have thousands of megawatt hours of storage, and this storage can be relatively cheap, or it's probably the lowest capital cost of energy storage in the market today when compared to other storage facilities such as sort of utility scale PV with batteries. So I mean, why do we think it's going to be beneficial to MENA and here in the region? And I'm specifically looking at sort of the DWA project, which we're very excited about. And just to clarify, the DWA project at the moment isn't specifically going to be just tower technology. It is open to other technologies, but we're hoping that with technology, with the tower technology that's available today, that the cost per kilowatt hour, or the LCOE is used, will show that this is the leading technology in the market today, and hopefully we and other tower developers will be able to prove that to the MENA region and and to DWA. So I mean, why do we think it's a good match? So I think the economics of the tower with storage will obviously help, because of as Belen said, we have the high capacity factors. Now, capacity factors, for those who don't really understand, is the amount of time that the project is able to work compared to other technologies without storage, where you have, say, wind or PV without storage, or CSP possibly without storage, is that the capacity factors drop down to 20 to 40%. Where with the storage, as we're seeing in the Abengoa project in Chile, and our projects in South Africa and Crescent Dunes, is that our capacity factors are 80% plus. So that's a huge advantage again to the utility and the end user. The ability to decouple the solar storage to the solar generation is a huge advantage to the grid, and it's able to harmonize with the grid, which is sort of a big advantage to the operators. The LCOE price of renewables without storage is a kind of a number that's battered around, and it's a kind of a number, or a matrix. It doesn't really capture the full cost. It doesn't capture, or it fails to capture what we call the net system cost, which is the cost to the grid. This is due to the hourly sort of variations in the electricity demand and the price. So it doesn't capture that true cost of the value of the storage, because if we have other technologies that do not have the storage, you still have to maintain the grid, still has to produce power for the end users. And I think the more PV and technologies we're seeing without storage, we're going to see the more disadvantages that's going to play to the grid, because of its sort of intermittency are being more and more recognized, and obviously that has that sort of negative impact on the grid and the infrastructure, and the power supply, to make sure that that it can be stabilized. So the more and more power that goes onto the grid that hasn't got storage, then I think that's going to be a negative impact on the grid. Yes, PV is currently less expensive than CSP technologies, and I think that's mainly driven because of the rapid decrease in capital expenditure over the recent years. And obviously this has contributed to the penetration of the amount of PV projects that have been developed and now into construction and now into operation, where we're looking at sort of 150 gigawatts of power compared to sort of 5 gigawatts of power that the CSP that are in operation. So we see the market trend, as Belen sort of showed in her presentation, is that the more CSP that's being developed and built, and we see that trend happening now, the greater the cost reductions are seeing. And we're seeing that even without this huge sort of pipeline of new projects coming, we're seeing huge reductions in pricing from our Crescent Dunes project, which went into operation in September last year, to the costings that we're looking at now for our Redstone project that's going into construction in August. So we're already seeing big reductions. And further again, we're looking at the sort of hybrid solutions, which is the CSP and PV hybrid, which again can achieve these higher capacity factors and lower, the more important thing, the cost of the kilowatt hour to the end user. And how this works is obviously the cheaper PV can be used within the solar field. The solar field then gets reduced from the CSP part, so the actual solar field costs are less and the capex are lower, by the introduction of the PV technology. And also with the PV, it allows more storage to be used during the daylight hour of the CSP. And the PV can be used, because it's able to capture some of the diffused radiation as well, sort of maybe during sort of cloudier sort of days. So advantages there for the CSP and PV, and we're been working with Mazen in terms of the technology and looking at this for like the Medill project. That the RFQ is now sort of being released. So we're very excited, for the technology advancements and this hybridized situation. So a little bit more detail on to the Crescent Dunes. I mean, this is really the groundbreaking project for CSP with Tower. It's got a huge sort of heritage behind it in terms of, we have the PS10s and the PS11s. We've got, Solar 1 and Solar 2, which was solar reserves technology that were developed and built in the early 80s and 90s, for the pilot projects. And then the sort of the Hammer Solar project, which is a very similar technology to the solar reserves technology. But this is the real first utility scale project, that's really competing against other forms of conventional power, that's able to, harness the power and deliver the power that's needed on a similar way to conventional power. So this project is it's finished, it's in operation. It's a 110 megawatt facility. You can see it's got a 195 meter tall tower with the little light bit on top is the solar receiver. The black dots that are surrounding the tower are the heliostats, or the mirrors. Each one of those mirrors are controlled to enable them to focus the sunlight to the top of the tower very, very accurately. Each one of those mirrors can move independently. They focus both horizontally and vertically to ensure that, from over a mile away, or over 1.5 kilometers away from the tower. They're able to focus on the tower, and there's over 10,000 heliostats in this project. So each one of those 10,000 are able to move independently of each other. So there's over like 1 million square meters of glass that are used in these projects. So I mean, the project, I say, is in full operation under the PPA. It achieved that in 2015. We're hoping to ramp up now. The next, the rollout plan is to get up to its full production of 500,000 megawatt hours over the coming year. The technology, which obviously Solar Reserve is very, very passionate about, and obviously it's our technology, is performing in excess of what we predicted it would do, or what we designed, or our design expectations are. So we're very pleased with the technology, and so are obviously our sponsors and the lenders, and the lenders are looking at future projects for South Africa, Chile, etc. And now having the confidence in the technology. Before, the technology was new, but now the technology is in the market, it's working, it's available. It hasn't got that sort of fear factor about it now that it's a new up-and-coming technology. It's here today, which is great for going forward. So going forward is obviously our next project, which is our Redstone project in South Africa that was awarded. We're in the final throes of financial close now, which, as I said before, we're looking to have that sort of client closed and into full notice to proceed in August. So that project will sort of go into hopefully operation in around about 2018. It's basically a cookie cutter design of the Crescent Dunes project. It's 100 megawatts. It's got 10 hours of storage. It's able to sort of power, in terms of, you're looking at sort of homes, over 200,000 homes, to just give you an idea of the scale. And again, the scale of the footprint of these projects, they're around about sort of 650 hectares of land, to fit the solar field into the project. So that's moving forward. We're very excited about getting that into operation. In terms of the market, where it sort of moves next, we're very excited about the South African market. We have 3 other projects that we bid into round 4.5. We're just waiting to hear now the announcements on those. So that's exciting prospects for the future of CSP tower technology. In South America, we've actually just bid 5 further towers into the Chilean market, where we're actually competing against traditional and conventional power. But we believe, because of the solar radiation that's in Chile, which is the best in the world, that we're able to compete with the likes of coal and conventional power, and having extremely low cost per kilowatt hour, which obviously the utility and the end user is looking at. So again, we've touched on briefly, but I wanted to go on to this kind of not the next generation, because we're already doing it. We've been looking at sort of the hybridization of the CSP with PV. We've kind of done the blueprint of that for our projects in South Africa, where we've developed and built sort of 250 megawatts of PV, and now our Redstone project is actually going to sit within that sort of PV field. And it's the kind of the blueprint for the hybrid technology. The projects that we're looking at in Mazen and Chile and other jurisdictions is that the hybrid will be one integrated PV and CSP project, so one grid connection, not multiple grid connections. So it'd be ring fenced, so it's a ring fence type solar project. the advantages of having the PV and the CSP is that, you know, we have that reliability, the cost effective, the 24/7 base load type operation. It's able then to balance the intermittencies of the PV, you know, with the CSP and the storage. So that's a, you know, a cheap way of balancing the grid, and it's a cheaper solution, we believe, than, you know, sort of utility scale, you know, PV with batteries. That as a new technology has been proven, battery lives, you know, are not sort of explored to their maximum at the moment. We believe that, you know, sort of with high capacity factors, the battery lives will be, you know, limited in terms of the discharge and charging. Well, obviously that goes into then replacing them during the life of the project, where with salt, we don't need to replace the salt. It stays in that system for 25, 30 years, as long as the PPA. More importantly, because of the twin technologies, they both complement each other. You know, we're able to reduce that sort of cost per kilowatt hour, which obviously the end user is looking for, but keep those capacity factors really high, which obviously, you know, benefits the grid. And then, as I said before, we're able to balance the project, you know, so that the power that the utility receives is a firm power. There's no intermittency issues, so it helps sort of balance the grid. So hopefully we're seeing more and more of, you know, these sort of hybrid type projects. When we're looking, you know, maybe into the future, into the Saudi market, where, you know, sort of base load facility will be required, that we're able to deliver, you know, power 24/7, not just during the sunlight hours, but, you know, in the Middle East, where we have a power need that runs all day, all night, there's a huge drain on the system. We're able to match that facility or that need of the grid. You know, and then, like I say, the CSP is able to store the energy during the day, so we can use then the PV, you know, during the day for cheaper forms of energy. The PV can be used, you know, because it is diffused, because it uses more diffused energy more than diffused radiation more than direct radiation that the CSP uses. We're able to save some of the thermal energy storage to when it's needed, to periods of, you know, sort of during the evening or when there are days of cloud cover. So, I mean, I just wanted to cover that. Hopefully, if you have any questions, please, you know, feel free to address them to myself and Belen. I hope I haven't run over Belen. I mean, kick me under the table if you need me to stop, and perhaps I hand you back to Belen to conclude, you know, our conversations. I mean, just for us, I mean, we're here in the Middle East. We see the Middle East as a great potential, you know, sort of North Africa into the GCC. We have, you know, a Pacific office in Dubai that services this region, and, you know, we're very excited at the prospect, you know, of upcoming projects, and we're seeing those now in the region. You know, the traction is starting to come, which is very exciting for the future of CSP, we believe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. You know, you can tell how good your presentation was by the variety of questions we've gotten. We have a lot of questions here. I have open more than 19. Some of them I've been able to answer the easiest ones, I have to say. We're just not going to have enough time to answer them all. So let me just very quickly, like, okay, so there is two types of questions here, and clearly there are a lot of people in here that know what they're talking about, big time. They're very specific questions too. But okay, there is the question of price, right? And the question of price comes up and up and up all the time. What I was thinking, actually, Phil, if it's okay with you, I will compile all of these questions and then send them around to you to see whether you can answer them somewhat shortly by text, so by writing them, so that we can share them with everybody, because I don't want anyone's questions to go unanswered, but at the same time we don't really have time to keep going forever. So there's the question of price.
Sure.
A lot of the questions here are, you know, sort of what's the real price, how much is it going to come down, what does it mean adding PV in terms of price. You know, even there is a question here that is very particular to Massen and middle compared to Nor. So like once you add that PV, how much can we expect the cost to come down? Of course, we know that Digua made an announcement for 8 cents. But I think this was more of a let it sit there and try to get people to kind of work towards that. But we know that is not the case at the moment. I think the cheapest. I think the person from Mustafa from Massen said there is 14 cents kilowatt hour in Nor as of today. So it's 14 cents of euro per kilowatt hour. So how much would you expect this to come down once you hybridize it over time? I don't know. Can you give us a little bit of an idea, because it's a tough question to answer. You know, there is so many
variables that come into, you know, the pricing, and I don't really like just sort of throwing figures out there, because, you know, until you start, you know, having a real project to work on, and you have real data to work with, you have, you know, sort of the EPC on board, you know, you have real costings, you have the financing that you're looking at. But all I can say is, in terms of, you know, where we are today with projects completed, i.e., you know, Crescent Dunes, which would probably be the most expensive project we will do, because it's the first of a kind, it's new technology, everyone needed to get comfortable with it. To where we are today in Redstone, you know, we're seeing, you know, huge reductions of, you know, 30%, you know, reductions, and looking to ahead to where we're bidding now, excuse me, for projects in Chile. You know, we're seeing cost reductions from where we were in Redstone to where we are in Copiapo. And, you know, so we're very, very confident that, you know, the cost per kilowatt hour, which is the key important thing, is definitely in the digits that, you know, the utilities and the end users are going to expect. Yes, it's more expensive than PV, but as we've said before, you know, the true benefit of storage isn't sort of evaluated in the LCOE costs. You know, we need to look at the whole package and the net system cost, as I said before. You know, the amount of projects that are done, you know, 150 gigawatts of power compared to 5, you know, I mean, there's this huge sort of area that we need to sort of fill, and as we do more projects, as projects get built in China, as projects get built in South Africa and Chile, you know, we're already seeing that the prices are coming down.
I mean, probably not to the 3 cents, but we're going down as well. Would you say that possibilities of like 30 to 50% cost reductions are within range in the next 5 years?
Oh yeah, we're already seeing that. We're already seeing that, you know, from Crescent Dunes to Redstone.
Okay, so definitely it's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's happening. Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of people have asked about this issue with molten salts and whether, in terms of storage, they're replaceable, they can be changed with sand. Has been mentioned quite a bit. And as I said, I'm going to take all your questions, guys, and I'm going to get either myself, Phil, or some technician to answer them to the best of our capacity. There is often not a black and white answer to most of the questions you're asking, right? But we're going to try and get some answers. Is there anything better than molten salts? Why are we sticking with molten salts? What's the why molten salts is what gets thrown down so much?
I think, you know, with molten salts, you know, again, it's a technology now that has been proven. You know, it's a type of storage medium that's able to reach, you know, the high temperatures. It's great for storing the energy. You know, the market today for the technology for tomorrow is here today. You know, we're able to use molten salts today, you know, sort of effectively. We've done it for many years, not with just tower technologies, but, you know, with the trough technologies that have been around for many years. You know, the tower technology, having that single heat transfer fluid, you know, is still, we believe, you know, the best technology to use and the best storage medium to use. You know, we're getting asked a lot, you know, about PV and batteries, and I'm not going to sort of drill into too much detail on those types of technology, but what we're seeing is yes, maybe 5 years, well, not 5 years, 10 years, 20 years time, maybe PV and batteries will be, the prices that are affordable, but today, in the next 10 years, they're not going to be. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done on battery storage, we think, until it's a technology that will compete with, molten salt today, that's available today. That these projects will run for the next 25, 30 years, and it's today, it's ready to go.
I think one of the things also, I guess, that we should mention here, that it's really apparent, so maybe I'm just saying something that is completely obvious, is that when you use molten salt as your thermal fluid as well as your storage medium, you don't need exchangers, you don't need to change, you don't have the kind of losses. Whereas when a lot of the questions are, how can we use sand? Yes, you can. But then you've got that issue of having to constantly transform that energy from one medium to another, so there is some losses inherent to that, so just bear that in mind. Just wanted to mention this. And there is a few questions here that are very specific in terms of how your solar field is laid out, and the questions are things like, first heliostat, is it the same as the last heliostat? Is it a different angle? It looks like the field isn't round, so maybe you can just give us a little bit of an understanding of
sure.
how the layout of the actual,
I mean,
in terms of the
the heliostat field is though I'd say there's a field of mirrors, there's 10,000 of these mirrors. They are very, very important to the plant, and the position of them are, sort of engineered to the great sort of detail. Now, each one of these heliostats, as I said, there's many different heliostats in the market today. It's a commodity again, ranging from the very small, such as the bright source type or e-solar type heliostat, right through to sort of 96 square meters up to 115 square meters. They are varying in size, and different technology providers have their own sort of ideas of which one to use. Each one of these, as I said before, each one of the heliostats are able to move and focus. They each have a drive that they're able to move both vertically and horizontally. They're the same heliostat field that's at the closest to the tower that it is from the furthest point away. But as I say, each one of them are able to sort of move and focus, to capture the sun and focus it on that tiny receiver. When I say tiny, it's like 40 meters tall, but in terms of it being sort of 1.5, 1.6 kilometers away, they're still able to focus the sun's energy very, very accurately onto the receiver. So although there's different types of designs, they are very, they are kind of a standard commodity. Another thing I didn't touch on, which I just, again, whilst we're just talking about heliostats, is kind of the local content that most people look at. Mazen has a very high sort of local, not high, but a local content sort of need. We see that as a great thing for the technology, because most of this stuff can be built in country. The heliostats are glass and steel. The tower's concrete. There's wiring, cabling. Most of this stuff can be built and supplied in country. It's really only the receiver, that's sort of outside of the country. But even for us, we've got sort of places in Saudi that can do it. The turbines, can be purchased in country sometimes, in Saudi, for example. So I just want to focus, a great deal of this can be built in country, which obviously helps, the economy, it helps the employment, it helps sort of, sort of getting knowledge and transfer into the countries for long-term, future of the country, not just going in, bringing in supplies from other countries. This can be done in country.
Okay, so one note I wanted to make is that somebody from DIWA actually pointed out that the technology hasn't been fully decided for DIWA. I think originally there was like, DIWA just blasted out, yeah, why not this technology, why not this price, but it's not set in stone. Of course, the tender documents haven't come out. Very good point with the localization, and that is an issue. And I guess, we kind of have to say goodbye because people have other things to do, I'm sure, and it's been an hour now. But I just wanted to ask you one last thing, and is that it seems like we're in a place where we have kind of one of some several choices, right? There is we can go through on the low cost choice, which is kind of what PV did. Okay, we'll go through low cost. We can go down the high efficiency route, which is like more what you're talking about. Okay, molten salts, high temperatures, supercritical turbines. We can talk about CO2. Perhaps someone mentioned CO2 there as a heat transfer fluid. So there is a bunch of ways in which we could go about it, or we can just say, you know what, we're going to go mass market and we're going to do just steam. I guess the choice is easy for you, right? But the question for me is like, what will get us more critical mass in terms of as an industry? If we go the low cost route, if we go the high efficiency route, if we go the mass market route, what is your opinion? Because I'm going to ask everybody else, by the way, in a poll. In fact, Phil, if you don't mind, if you actually answer that question, was I throw the poll? Let me see. Let me see if I can actually.
Sure. I mean, I think as I touched on before, I think, what we're seeing is as more and more power goes onto the grid that is coming outside of the conventional power, be it wind or PV or solar without storage, is that there's this problem for the grid operator in terms of that they have to somehow balance that the grid. And what we're seeing is that with the storage, with CSP with storage and the CSP tower with storage, is that we're able to do that for them. We're able to give them, the power that's on a firm delivery that doesn't have the sort of fluctuations in terms of intermittency of cloud cover. And as I said before, we then become more of a slave to the grid in terms of we can do it when they need it, rather than having to take the power when it's being generated from sort of wind or other technology without storage. And I mean, we need the high capacity factors are key. The higher capacity factor we have, the amount of generation that can be done. These projects are able to produce sort of twice the power of technology without storage. So I think there's many drivers. I think the cost element will obviously be a driver on that, and I think the beauty of it is that we're already seeing those cost reductions today in the projects that we're doing. We're only a small portion of the 5 gigawatts that has been done and the proposed gigawatts that are in the pipeline. But we're already seeing those cost reductions, and that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming for getting the technology right, getting the sort of getting the mix right, so that we're able to give the power when it's needed at a cost that's competitive to conventional power and other forms of technologies.
Okay, fabulous. So guys, okay, I'll give you another 10 seconds to get your votes in. I've been asking also, Phil, everybody what they think in terms of, so the question was, in terms of technology, what are the biggest opportunities in your opinion, for CSP obviously, following the low-cost route, parabolic trough, Fresnel, cheap and cheerful, following the high-efficiency route, tower with molten salt, supercritical cycles, etc., the holistic approach, hybridizing with PV, or decentralized applications, hot water, steam, and other industrial applications. So actually, most of the people have already voted, but come on, I can see there is a few laggers still there. So I'll give you just a few seconds to get everybody in. Okay, let us take a look at what the results are. Okay, well, clearly there is a 56% of people who believe that the holistic approach is the way that we should go forward. So hybridizing with PV and with the grids, to think about structures with common sense, right? In the big, how do we? I mean, we know that in grids which have a lot of peak load, capacity comes to a point where you cannot put any more. So instead of that, why don't we think about a holistic approach? This is interesting. I think we're all very much in agreement. Okay, well, Phil, thank you very much for your time, and thank you all of our participants. It's been great sharing some time with you guys. We will circulate the presentations. I'm going to put them on a landing page so that you can all just click and download them. We'll put Phil's presentation, we'll put my presentation, and we'll also put the recordings of the webinar so you can watch it again. All of your questions, I'm going to collect them, and I'm going to try to get Phil to reply to as many as I can, and then anybody else who might have like a know-how in a particular area, and I will follow up with that. Either Sarah or myself will send you an email. Feel free to email me. My email is belen.gallego@ata.email. I put that earlier, or you can find me on LinkedIn, anywhere else. Phil, thank you very much for your time. It's been great hearing from you. And we will make sure that we have more of this. If you have any suggestions as to the topics that you'd like to be covered, please email me and we will organize more of this. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm looking forward to the next occasion. Thank you.
Thank you, Belen. See you soon. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.